Hello and welcome to another episode of the Inter Show. Unfortunately, it is just myself again tonight. The reason being that we're transitioning from one platform, namely Anchor, to another, hopefully Skype record. And we're just running things through the system, trying to see what works and what doesn't. And hopefully should be up and running properly again from next week, and hopefully get an episode out just before the Champions League match against Spurs. As followers of the podcast will know, we do have issues. We have had a lot of issues with Anchor. It was great to get us up and running and to get the podcast started. But as we've grown and as we've gained members from across the world, we've got people on the West Coast and the East Coast of the United States. We've got Anthony in Australia, we've got a couple of people in Ireland. And I think the distance between us all is stretching the Anchor service a little bit too much. So we're hopefully moving on to a new one, which would mean hopefully a smoother service for all of our listeners. Just going to run through things quickly tonight. Obviously, it's a while since we recorded the last one. It was before the Bologna match and before the international break. The reason being for that was we've been researching the different options for trying to find the best service to record going forward. It was a great result, winning 3-0 at Bologna. Bologna is not it's a place where you would expect to get 3 points, but it's not the easiest of places to go to either. The performance probably left a little bit to be desired, and it really took Nainggolan to change things later on in the match. It was great as well to see Politano getting in on the action with the assist for Nainggolan, which I think is a point that a lot of people have missed. They haven't picked up on that, which shows that he's progressing in the team. Kondreva, who didn't score the whole of last season, came on as a substitute in the 79th minute and scored 3 minutes later. So I don't know what that tells you, other than it just reconfirms how crazy Inter are. And Perisic getting the third one. Obviously, you've all had a lot of time to chew over that result and the performance, and no doubt you've read and listened to other podcasts, so I'm not going to dwell on that too much tonight, only to say that hopefully it will give the lads the bump they need to take the season on from there and get back to what we expect, particularly after such a good summer campaign of transfer business. Then in the last week, we've had a range of internationals which have concerned pretty much everyone who presents this podcast. Anthony is Australian, but he's more interested, I believe, in Italy. Italy obviously are struggling at the moment. It was very strange to see how poor they were against Portugal. It looks like they've really taken a downward step. That said, looking at the Italian press and listening to a few Italian language football podcasts during the last few days, particularly Interline, it doesn't seem all doom and gloom, because Mancini is quite obviously moving towards bringing new players in and building this side up, which is what Italy really need, because that side kind of really aged under Ventura, and there were a lot of retirements. And the step forward is going to be bringing in youth, which naturally is going to bring in difficult stages. It's not easy to bring in a range of young players all at once, and particularly with the European Nations League, because I think there's a lot of almost confusion amongst different teams, that some of them seem to be treating it as a friendly tournament, some of them seem to be really going for it. I would say that Italy's poor result really, although the game against Portugal, they didn't perform at all. The game against Poland was really the bad result, because losing in Portugal, let's be honest, can happen. The players that they have are, and I'm not just talking about Cristiano Ronaldo, are top quality. Um, Whereas when you're playing Poland, no disrespect to Poland, but Italy surely would expect to beat Poland, particularly when they're playing them at home. So that 1-1 result really set them back. But I kind of feel that Italy are going to target qualifying for the European Championships through their qualification group. They've never been a team that, even at their best, they've never been a team that's particularly performed well in friendlies or qualification tournaments. And I just don't envisage them really gunning for that European Nations League. Maybe it'll turn that I'm wrong, but the Italian trend throughout history has been to qualify in a way of just sort of getting the job done, rather than actually showing their hand before the tournament. So hopefully they're going to improve. In terms of myself, the first result, the Welsh result against Ireland, was great, winning 4-1, and the team looked really fluid. Ryan Giggs again is pointing towards using a lot of youth players, and it was a special match in a way for me, because although I live in Ireland, I am, as you know, Welsh, but a lot of my family are Irish too, and for us to beat Ireland is a little bit like, for me, a little bit like beating your brother. You always want your brother to do well, always want your brother to be successful, but when you play against your brother, you want to win. It really becomes a derby match, and that was special. It was a bit of a setback losing in Denmark. Again, reflecting on Italy's result in Portugal, I would say that losing in Denmark can happen to most teams. You would expect the likes of France, maybe Brazil, to go there and win. But for the likes of Wales, losing in Denmark is no disgrace. And hopefully when they get back to Cardiff, they can build from the Ireland result rather than the Danish one. Ian, who will be joining us shortly, we keep trying to get Ian on, but obviously the technical difficulties are throwing a bit of a spanner in the works there. Again, he had a bit of a mixed bag of results. He's from the north of Ireland, and they lost their first match against Bosnia 2-1 in Belfast. Then they beat Israel 3-0 in a friendly. So again, a mixed bag there. Going back to Inter, which is obviously the purpose of this podcast, looking into the Parma match before the Tottenham one, and one of my biggest concerns would be that the players don't focus on playing Spurs. They need to get the job done in the league first. Realistically, this season we're not going to win the Champions League. It's a building process. It's probably a 3-year building process. So we just need to look at the Champions League, I would say, more as almost a bonus. Yeah, a massive step in the right direction, but just targeting getting as far as we can rather than actually looking at making serious waves. I mean, obviously, Liverpool were a big surprise last year, and it can happen. And it would be wonderful if it did, but the bread and butter has got to be the league, and beating the likes of Parma in Milan has to be there has to be no questions over that. We need to go into that match gunning and play like we did against Torino in the first half, and build on that in the second half, rather than dropping off thinking that the job is done and letting them back into it. Obviously, it's not going to be an easy game. Parma, realistically, probably at the start of a building process themselves. And this year will be targeting survival, which means they're going to probably arrive in Milan, park the bus, and try and get what they can out of the match. And it's going to be up to us to break that match down. Again, like with Bologna, you would be looking at Nainggolan to do that. You'd also be looking, I think, at Politano, and the likelihood is that Icardi is going to be rested for the ahead of the Spurs match. Martinez is not; it doesn't seem to be fit. Still seems to be nursing an injury. So you're looking at Keita, and you'd really be wanting much more from him than he showed against Bologna. I think he's a very talented player, and he's proved that with Lazio and Monaco in the past. And even though he was let go by the Barcelona youth system, you generally don't get onto the Barcelona youth system unless you've got something serious going for you anyway. So I would have great faith that he will produce the kind of performances that we're looking for, but we need him to do it, and we need him to do it now. In terms of Politano and Perisic, I'm fairly confident that they will put in a shift. They pretty much have done throughout this season so far, despite some less than positive results at times. But I would be confident of that going forward. And then you're really looking at hoping that Brozovic steps up to the mark, because we really need him. We don't have, as we said several times, we don't have that holding midfield player. We don't have that player with the final touch. We didn't get Modric. We've got to live with that and move on. But we really need Brozovic to step up to the plate and really be somebody that opens teams up, like he was doing towards the back end of last season. Just we do like to bring you a little bit of history, and one thing that came that I was looking through the Inter archive, and one thing shocked me was that actually the first match we ever played against Parma was on the 18th of September of 1960. I knew Parma were late coming to Serie A. It was really only the 90s that they sort of took off as a club, but I would have thought that we'd have played them before then. That said, it was a 3-1 away win with two goals from Angelillo, Fermani scored, Giurini scored. Then 13 years later was the next time that we played Parma, and again that was a 3-1 win. And goals, a brace from Boninsegna, Andreuzza scored an own goal, and Sega scored. And then again, it was another 10 years before we played them, and then we started to play them every sort of 3 or 4 years in cup competitions before they kind of arrived in the 90s, and we started playing them more regularly. I just thought it was very interesting that, such a significant club in the last 20 or 30 years of Italian football, and we didn't play them until the start of the 60s. And within a few days of when we're playing them this season, I remember being in the San Siro in the 2009-2010 season. That was at the beginning of the campaign as well. And we won 2-0 against them with late goals from Milito and I think it was Esso. I'd really recommend going on to the Inter archive. It can be found on the official website, and there's a huge amount of information on there for anyone who's into statistics and so on. Really sort of wrapping up of just one thing, that going back to the Parma game. I'm a fan of the Interline Inter podcast. It's an Italian language podcast. It's the only one that I'm aware of that is actually commercially broadcast. It's broadcast on a radio station called RMC Sport. and it's hosted by, I think the guy's first name is Francesco Biasin, and a well-known inter sports journalist, Lapo Di Carlo, who was involved with Radio Milan Inter and also writes extensively for FSC Inter News. Also, he's often on things. He's often on football programs on a wide range of Italian broadcasting stations, and he was talking about he was worried about the match against Sampdoria, that he feels that at home we'll put in a good performance against Parma, we'll put in a good performance against Spurs. And he thinks that we'll come out with a couple of good results, but then going away to Sampdoria, we'll go almost with our heads full, and that's what will cause us to slip up. And I can see where he's coming from, and that's really, I would say, a job for Spalletti to keep on top of. I was going to mention that the Primavera side gets its campaign off to a start tomorrow at 2:00 Irish time, 3:00 Italian time. That's actually live on Sport Italia. If you go to the Sport Italia website, there's no sort of geo-block or anything. Anyone anywhere in the world can watch their live streams and come watch that match. And considering the team has been so successful over the past few years, it's probably well worth keeping an eye on how they go this year. I'm going to wrap up just to mention that, as far as I'm aware, the Inter Club in London is still taking applications for this season, for anyone who's in that part of the world and is interested in that. And also the Inter Club that's being set up in Belfast seems to be going from strength to strength and seems to be gaining a lot of prospective members and is almost in the final stages of setting up. They also have a bar set up where there'll be a special sections for people to go and watch the Inter matches. It's according to the guys up in Belfast, it's the biggest sports bar in Ireland. So I'm sure it'll be very exciting for anybody who's in that part of Ireland and wants to join up with them. They'll be made most welcome. And I'll tweet details out in the next day or so for who to get in contact with regarding that. I'm going to call it a night there. Sorry that it's just been myself again, but I promise that from next week we'll be back up and running, and it has literally been whilst we've been changing technology and moving on to a more reliable platform, which hopefully will give you a better experience when you're listening to us. So I'll sign off and say Forza Inter, and until the next time, ciao.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.